may have been able to defeat that simpleton, but golf will be more than a match for you!
Bring it on, Shorty!
Welcome! Obscure Titan has returned with a new video, episode 10 of the Megatronic Legacy writing series. Nearing halfway through the series, we're now going to look into Spyro's greatest enemy of the series. Whether if it's in the PS1 era, Legend of Spyro, or Skylanders, no villain has garnered as much notoriety as the little midget shorty himself, Ripto. With episodes such as Shantae, Godzilla, and the Genie lore touched on, this all culminates to Ripto's side of the series. This time though, he'd have a darker and more sympathetic take. But to do that, we have to look at two main sources to understand where Ripto was originally, and an inspiration that leads to the conception of Ripto's arc in Megatronic Legacy. Miss Alika will get some mentions here and there, and that's because she plays a bigger role in Ripto's characterization. Gulp and Crush will have their play that adds to the arc. So...
Now! Go! Crush! Get the orbs now!
Alright, Ripto. We'll get started. You need to hold your rep talks. After Spyro 1, we see the purple dragon and Sparks standing out in the rain at the Dragon Realms. Their best course of action is to go to Dragon Shores. However, in Avalar, Elora, Hunter, and Professor tap into using orbs which summon Spyro into their world. While Spyro questions what happened, a blast of energy crashes the portal and enters Ripto. He intimidates the civilians of Avalar until...
A dragon? You brought a dragon to Avalar? I hate dragons! Yeah!
Ripto proceeds to use his scepter against Spyro, but was stopped by the fairy Zoe. After all this, he leaves. Throughout the game's events, Ripto has been causing trouble across Avalar and got the civilians to turn against each other. Spyro spent a good chunk of his time collecting the 14 talismans and eased the tensions of each level he's entered. Thinking that Gulp's defeat led to Ripto's demise, this resulted to his return in Winter Tundra and stole the Power Crystal as his new scepter. Spyro confronts a little Reptok and defeats him. There isn't much to Ripto's character other than the fact that he hates dragons. You'd think he may have gone through some form of trauma, or perhaps he's been part of a guild that consisted of his race and he's the smallest of the group. It's not to say Ripto is a one-dimensional villain. As a matter of fact, his interaction with Spyro, though still a bit scarce compared to Dr. Cortex and Crash, were highlights to the story. But that being said, I like to segue from the Spyro series a bit to discuss a different media that could apply to my take on Ripto himself. According to the TF Wiki, Megatron takes a stock of both his new form and the Decepticons who have been succumbed to Starscream in his absence, were stranded on an asteroid with little to no energy to restore themselves. Megatron approaches Starscream in his throne room, darkened and crippled. Not going as expected, he confronts the Seeker in his weakened state. Instead of finishing him off, Megatron taunts and threatens Starscream over his failures and defeats as the leader of the Decepticons. It all led to Megatron spewing the words,
"All hail Starscream. You must be very proud."
This led to Starscream backing him off, even to the point of firing back, but flees in terror as Megatron follows him. The Decepticon warlord continues to taunt and verbally berate him, asking if he wishes to die and fade from existence. Once he was done with Starscream, Megatron returns to the Decepticons to rally them. Throughout this endeavor, we see Megatron who has been berating the Decepticon Seeker. But why? What was there that causes this whole thing to go down? Well, there were panels throughout the comics that explained Starscream's fascination with the Decepticon leader, to the point of crying over him. Megatron has been shown to be a brutish, powerful, and warmongering monster. This traumatizes the Seeker, to the point of using his brute strength to scare the Seeker into submission. So what does Spotlight Starscream and Megatron have anything to do with Ripto? This is where his origins come in. To start this off, I should bring up Miss Alika. Miss Alika, in the Mortal Brothers 2019 canon, was a lieutenant of Crystal Celestia who fought against various factions to maintain peace. But her father's murder would bring her into an insane hatred for her leaders and led a rebellion. She sought after Nexus Netherworld and rules it with an iron fist. I've made 4 novel summaries of her story, and can check those out for further context. But let's get back on track. In this take, I intend to make Mesalika a cruel and intimidating tyrant, similar to her 2019 counterpart, yes, but this would have Ripto, while still being a villain, have a more sympathetic side to him. Ripto was Mesalika's servant throughout her pure democratic rulership, since she's rigged elections to remain in power for thousands of years. She's treated her weaker servants with no mercy, demanding her experimentations into fruition and even scare them into death sentences should they fail her. The Riptocs, in this instance, would be the slaves and servants who worked with little to no compensation. They worked and died. The most noticeable Riptok servants besides Ripto were Crush and Gulp. The former was put into a pile of workers to break stones, while the latter delivers them from state to state in Mystica. This puts Ripto in a very dark spot in his life, as he and his folks are suffering under Mesalika's iron fist. It's also implied in Ripto's origin that he had parents prior to being forced into Mesalika's tyranny. She pushes the Riptocs to a point where their population numbers have slowly decreased, essentially snuffing their species out of existence through endless work and little to no compensation. Enraged by Mesalika's toxicity, Ripto has not only grown to hate her, but also hating the dragons in general. Because of her characteristics such as wings, claws, tail, and teeth, this makes any dragon superior to many species, save for Cybertronian species. Ripto plots an insurrection against Mesalika and take over Mystica. He wanted a more just and fair society. This results in a disastrous failure on his end. Not only are Mesalika's warriors superior in terms of strength, quantity, and cunning, but Mesalika herself is a mastermind at war. He and his remaining Riptocs, Crush and Gulp to name a few, dug themselves below Mystica, all the way down to the southern half of the Nexus Pillar, naming it Riptorox. If you need more context in this segment, check out my Shantae video. Moving on, Ripto has spent several years following his failed revolution in building a society. Sadly, he and his species struggle to claim the resources to survive. Day after day, Ripto has lived in fear, sorrow, and hatred. Mesalika has traumatized him, and he will never forgive her. Crush and Gulp would be shown to continue to support the little Riptok in his hardships. Despite their lack of cunning, as Ripto does show in some form, not the exact capacity Mesalika has. Throughout Riptorox, there are gemstones called the Orbs. Ripto sends out his best Riptocs to find them and use for his attempts to save his race. Hoping to find a new home, Ripto uses the Orbs to build portals, but since much of his resources were dismantled by Mesalika's militia, his chances fell into failure. But one day, he attempted to build a portal to the Genie Realm. In it, Shantae appears with the Godzilla egg and Mother's lamp. During his alliance with Shantae, he persuades Queen Zapple to allow his suggestions to come and go. In other words, he would be allowed to do as he pleases, even if it happens to put America on Earth in danger. He assures the only reason would be, and based on his private talks with Shantae, is to look for the key to Yalhalrex, which is located in Las Vegas, Nevada. She begrudgingly agrees. He helps Shantae gain control of Godzilla from 1981 to 1984, the end year being the moment where the kaiju is under their control. Not much needs to be said since a lot of it has been discussed in the Shantae video, so let's just discuss Ripto's part. Working with Shantae, Ripto sends out Gulp and Crush into each regime in the Genie Realm, the former at Celestial Rim and latter at Sunlight Ring. Ripto himself would reside at the Starlight Gate, the Genie Realm equivalent to having a space bridge. But as Spyro and his crew came closer to leaving the Genie Realm and stopping Godzilla from damaging America, Ripto is hell-bent into seizing after the Purple Dragon himself. It would be in the style of Ripto's rage, but delving into Ripto's trauma. We see flashbacks in the site wherever he sees Spyro or any dragon, he sees Mesalika's silhouette. The wings, tail, claws, and teeth. Ripto cowers back and retreats. His fears would lead to his defeat. But as Spyro's team face Shantae and Godzilla near the Genie Space Bridge, Ripto messes with Zapple's emblem to achieve power. This results to the realm being depowered. No word was heard from, except that Ripto took Gulp and Crush with him to Mystica in hopes to use this newfound power that was meant to keep the Genie Realm intact. But it gets worse from here. Following the Genie Realm shutdown, Ripto makes his way towards Mystica and plots to use his new powers in hopes of killing Mesalika himself. While Etna and her troops check on the Genie Realm, Ripto confronts Mesalika and threatens to destroy her with his new powers he obtained for taking Zapple's emblem. She taunts him and reminding him that he's still too weak to actually win. Ripto uses levitation and star power to overwhelm Metallica, but this would be foiled as she uses all of her strength and cunning to do the same to him. She clouds his mind with her threats and even to the point of a desire for her species' extinction. Pushing him to the point where Ripto would become overwhelmed with the power he has, Metallica quickly snatches Zapple's emblem and hurls him to her feet on the ground. Gulp and Crush would join the fight in stopping her, but were stopped by General Zarkar and his troops. Overwhelmed, Ripto and his minions would remain locked up until at some point in the story where Spyro's crew would confront the tyrannical queen herself. Shortly after Spyro defeats Metallica, Ripto escapes Mystica along with Gulp and Crush back into their homeworld. His status in post-Metallica downfall is yet to be discovered, but because of Spyro's heroic deed in ending Metallica's reign does ease his fears and wishes to know why the Purple Dragon would go to great lengths into doing so. Ripto will remain neutral throughout the President Conquer arc, and could eventually have an actual redemption arc. Being someone who's been abused by Metallica's violent tendencies, Ripto could learn to being a better person. This wouldn't be immediate, of course. There would be others that doubt him. These doubts could eventually make Ripto nervous, who is still healing from the emotional scars left by his former master. His conflict with Spyro would transition from a fight that's reminiscent of their interaction with Spyro 2 during the events of Awakening of Godzilla to just a mutual connection. Learning Ripto's trauma, Spyro could slowly see how his harsh endeavor pushed the Riptog into a state of panic, practically PTSD. They would be tested as to whether or not they would become allies in the face of Nasty Nork in 1991, but that has yet to be seen. Perhaps they needed to grow a mutual respect in order to win the Gulf War against Nasty and cure the scars left on them. Ripto, the servant of Metallica. He was an offspring of two Riptogs who were known to live in the primitive realm until Metallica's Socialist Union regime captured a good chunk of his species. Throughout his lifetime, Ripto was put into tasks of sorcery. Sometimes even has to write the Metallican language in the Megatronic continuity. Despite his accomplishment, Metallica still pushed him further. Metallica's abusive endeavor has pushed Ripto into a state of depression and uncertainty, which brings about his hatred of dragons. Ripto started a rebellion to overthrow Metallica. Sadly, this would fall into his defeat. His allies suffered great losses and dug themselves beneath Mystica into their own homeland, Riptorox. For several years following his rebellion's failure, Ripto has spent years trying to build portals to migrate into other worlds, but to no avail. Until that fateful day, Shantae enters his world, and his opportunity to get his revenge on Metallica blossom, even if he has to use Shantae the same way he was used by Metallica. I still stand by Nasty Nork having a more interesting character dynamic than Ripto, but that still doesn't change the fact that he's become a very popular villain in the Spyro series. Sure, we have our Malefor and Cinder, despite not being that great, but something about Ripto is intriguing. His interactions, catchphrases, and final battle has really made Spyro 2 the great sequel it has always been, and is still one of my all-time favorite video games. Next episode, we'll go into Etna. Not just that, but also giving Mekai Rankash and Vuparak their spot with her as well. I'm hoping to get access to the community tabs, but I need about 500 subscribers. If you like what you're seeing, feel free to subscribe, and I'll catch you all next time. Thanks for watching, over and out.